Good morning, teacups. How are you? Thank you for coming back to visit. I really appreciate that you took the time to come by and have a cuppa with me, if indeed you have one. If not, I think it's required. This one is a sit down and just kind of share in some of the midnight madness that I had overnight. I was unable to sleep around 4 o'clock in the morning. I woke up with having remembered a bunch of YouTube videos that I've seen. And I was inspired to to write 4 pages worth of point form before I could finally say, okay, it's out of my mind now. I can rest and go back to bed. So here it is. We're going to be talking about intro and beginner books in witchcraft, Wicca, and the pagan community. It's going to be just a little bit of, some observations that I've made. So here we are. We're talking about these intro books. There's been some discussion about how we don't have comprehensive or adequate intro beginner books in the current literature in witchcraft. Witchcraft / paganism, Wicca. There's a lot of that's just it. It's so diverse. So how can you find an intro book? That's what was on my mind. What I really enjoy about witchcraft, and I will describe myself as a pagan. I don't mind if you call me a witch. I've been called worse. I'm quite proud of being a practitioner of witchcraft as well. I really find a lot of solace and a lot of that's where I draw my strength. I really do. And my ability to cope in the mundane world. So I may have something to share. On the topic of intro books, I do agree that a lot of the books that are available and still available and have been for decades, i.e. Buckland and Cunningham and Doreen Valiente and Gerald Gardner and all of the books, Ravenwolf, all of the books that we've had so far that are still being recommended. Yeah, I think as pagans, reading all of those is great. It's absolutely wonderful. We need to know where we've been to know where we're going. And I think that people who have opinions, I'm really proud to hear that there's a level of dissatisfaction with the books from the past. And because that means we are critical readers. We are critical readers who research, how many witchy book tours videos have you seen? Those are my absolute favorites. That and flip through my grimoire or BOS. Literature excites me. Good research excites me. And I think that's part of what makes this community, the online community, the witchcraft community, even before online was even possible, I really enjoyed. What attracted me most is the independent thought that is cultivated in the world of paganism. It attracts people who research, it attracts people who read, it attracts people who are critical thinkers and who will never be complacent with just gobbling up dogma and saying, okay, this is, what I'm going to wear as an identity, spiritually, religiously. I'm going to wear this dogma, and come what may, I'm going to defend it viciously because that is the one truth. There's nothing like that in what I've seen in witchcraft. For the most part, it tends to, people will argue what they want in terms of their identity, that's for sure. But there's always room for more learning. That's what I'm trying to get at. There's always room for more learning. And so if somebody's defending something viciously, it would be to be more open to something, and to let go of dogma just for the sake of dogma. What I would say, and I guess part of what I'll say it, part of what kind of motivated me to make a video like this is I really enjoy Thorn Mooney. And she made a video, I think she was sitting in her car in this one, and she was saying that, just kind of reminiscing about a conversation with maybe a publisher or something, and she was told that we have enough intro books, we don't need any more intro books on our shelf. And that just kind of like, dude, it's Thorn Mooney. Like, are you living under a rock? You have to put her book on the shelf. So yeah, Thorn, that kept me up last night and fueled just a whole lot of argument in my mind, and that's kind of what got me to doing this. But there's more to this video than that. In fact, Thorn is at the level where, I mean, she can definitely write a book, and it could easily be required reading at the university level in, world religions. So any publisher who doesn't put her book on the shelf is, like, ill-informed and whatever. I have nothing else to say about that. So why would we want to put the word introduction or beginner book on witchcraft or everything you need to know about paganism? Why would we want to put that on a book cover? There are 3 people who could possibly benefit from that, and 2 of them I don't really think benefit from that. The one person who benefits from taking up that much space in a title on a book cover is the publisher, because they are attracting a type of reader to move the book off the shelf. That's the purpose. It presumes that you know very little or nothing about the subject matter, and that this is the one-stop shop that if you only invest a small amount of money, the cost of the book, and make a sale, that you'll be enlightened in this whole big thing. It doesn't really serve the author, because if indeed there's enough books on the shelf about that intro topic, then they don't want to have another one. So it doesn't serve the author. It also doesn't serve the reader, because it presupposes that that you don't know anything, and that you're at the beginning of your path. It's kind of like the other issue that I have is that it's very linear in thinking that there is a beginning of your path and you are at it. So at this point in time, because you know nothing or very little, you're going to make the purchase of this book. When in truth, many of us, from listening to personal sort of, videos and personal stories, many of us on our path buy an initial book and realize that our path started well before book reading had anything to do with it. Like in childhood, when did you realize that you were a witch? When did you realize that you were a pagan? When did things start not being good enough? When did you start, differing from the collective school of thought that you were brought up with in your family, in your environment, in your school? And it begins much younger. I mean, certainly abstract thought starts around the age of 13, and that's when you start challenging authority figures. But for many of us, it begins even in childhood, when we have our experiences with spirit, when we have our questions about the things the energy systems that we connect with quite easily, even just by sitting by a river and playing with sticks and being a little bit different than other people. So for many of us, the initiation or the introduction to begins long before the reading of one book. So that's kind of like another argument that I have about this need for an intro book. So what would you want to call an intro book, or do you even need an intro book? So what I'm suggesting is that we focus more on looking at resource books, because we do have great intro books, and maybe we just shouldn't be calling them intro books. What would go into an intro book? What would go into a valuable resource for people who know a little bit by Google searching about witchcraft and paganism? And where would you like to start? Well, basically, you start with what interests you. If you want to know about the practice itself, you may want to look at altars, and altar setups and altar tools, cardinal directions, colors of cardinal directions, the meaning of colors. You might want to look at the description of ritual. I'm looking down because, yeah, I did make a list. Deities, the whole concept of God, small g, big G, deities, plural, monotheism. You may want to look at that. And that is kind of like, you need a lot of books for that. You may want to look at practice, the difference between solitary and covens, and the whole structure of, playing different roles within a spiritual group. Disciplines. What kind of disciplines? Well, are you interested in herbology or crystals or activism? Apparently, hey, there's somebody who came up with, what was the video? Something about witchcraft activism. It's a big black book. If I can remember, I'll put a link to it down below. She did a book review on this thing, and I'm like, I never thought of witchcraft as a political movement. I always think about people who are practicing witchcraft as the oppressed, because in my studies, they've always been oppressed. They've always been the people who are outcast. And so I don't see them on their soapbox, kind of. But we kind of are at this point in history. We kind of are being more of an activist for the freedom, spirituality of practicing, religious practice and spiritual identity. So we kind of are more of a political type of pagan community at this point in history. So that is a new-ish development in the evolution of spirituality for us. Anyways, along with disciplines, are you interested in healing or doctrine? Anyway, you may want to look at the difference between hierarchy and a collective model. So when you're looking at witchcraft, could you put all of these in one book as a resource manual? I think so, but instead of having it as an intro book where you touch a little bit on many things, I think it would be more like an encyclopedia where you have some research to do with resources and places to look and concepts to look up. That would be more of a type of, now my cat is outside the door. That would be more useful, I think, to kind of promote, because clearly as a community we are dissatisfied with the little books that have been available to us, the little books that we got our start from. So I'm proposing that there's a bit of a change in what we're in search of. I don't think we are in search of a better intro book. I don't think that that's even needed. I think many people get beginnings from books that aren't even intro books. I'm going to give you a bit of an example of what were intro books to me back in my day. But first, I'm going to suggest, in keeping with, looking for resources, you might want to consider looking at resources like, if you want to know more about altar tools and the tools of what is, can be used and has been used historically by practitioners of the craft, you might want to look at a series such as this. And yes, it's Llewellyn. And this is by no means complete. There's still some books that I've yet to buy. But I guess I am the Llewellyn witch. This is, it's not a comprehensive collection, but it gives you a start. I don't think getting a beginner book is going to give you enough. You have to buy what it is or research online, find in the libraries, find sources that answer the questions that you are asking at this point in time. So right here you have a whole lot of information about tools, gives you history and uses of and how to craft your own. Generally, that's what these books set out to do. Another thing you would want to know, if looking at pagan belief systems is new enough to you, you may want to know more about how to observe holidays. The nice thing, and so here you have the holidays. These are called Sabbats, of course. And the nice thing about paganism and witchcraft is that, you really don't, there's no should. There's lots of room for flexibility. There's lots of room for customizing your own path. So if when you're looking at your prayer space, your altar space, your place where you come and withdraw from the rest of the world for peace, if you want to put incense and an athame and nothing else, if you want to put nothing on your table, if you want to put all kinds of, dolls and ribbons and things, it's all subjective. And that is one thing that attracts me most to it, is that it's not standardized. So you can look at ways of standardizing things, but if there are some reasons why you would want to not observe these Sabbats, or even in fact the Esbats, like the phases of the moon, and you want to observe different things, that's what I love about the fluidity and the allowance that comes with witchcraft, with paganism. Some things that you may also want to consider. I mean, these make great intro books too. If you are interested in elements, here you go. There is an excellent text, Deborah Lipp, on elements, if you want to know more about elements. So I think it kind of, here's another one. For me, buying an intro book, and I have a couple, but buying an intro book has always told me, a little bit about everything and nothing about a lot. Knowing a little bit about everything is kind of like going to a buffet and having a teaspoon of all kinds of things. And then I find that when I look back at the book, I'm kind of like, okay, well, one intro book is kind of good, I suppose. But now I have a whole lot of things that I know that I don't want. So I would say, look into and research the things that you want to know more about. This one's excellent. It's very old. Exploring Spellcraft. Here. This one, very old. I love it. Anything Phil Heim. He in one of his interviews will say, "Oh yeah, that chaos magic. I did that for a short time. It was a thing, I read this book. I wrote this book. They wanted to have 60,000 more words, so I put more words into it. And now I'm on to other things. He's talking now decades later, and he's saying now I'm on to other things. And I'm like, well, really? Well, I've been into this from the beginning, and I'm still into it. So, this makes sense to me. So this for me would be, if I wanted to introduce somebody to an intro of what makes sense to me, this would be an intro book. But it's not an intro to the craft as it was in the past. And I think that that's something that we want to recognize now, is that no one book will have a one-size-fits-all. In fact, that was kind of like a concern of mine when we think about having a book that's a one-size-fits-all kind of thing, an intro to, making a blanket statement about whatever. There will, I think, never really be one definitive guide. Because of the vast fluidity, of the vast sort of amount of information that's available, and the non-judgmentalism of people within this belief system, because it's basically all about world religions too. So if there's an introduction to Wicca, it would be probably one person's perspective on Wicca, which may collectively in our community be really, really great, if ever there was one. But maybe that was what was true for Scott Cunningham or for Buckland at that time. People may have looked at that and said, well, this is the definitive guide. In another 50 years from now, I would anticipate that the belief systems would be quite different as well. And at that point, you'd need different books. Anyway, this here is another really fantastic book, Grimoire for the Green Witch. But again, it's a great intro book if you are interested in green witchcraft. I'll give you an idea of what the intro books were for me. And this one actually, just because it's on the top of the pile, I got in my adult years. It was not an intro book for me, but I sometimes use it for things that I do with my children. I think this is the book that has like the day before the first day of school kind of ritual. And so we went to the lake one day and we did a thing. I think it came from this book. Anyway, this is a very old book and it's fun. I would anticipate that if you are looking at things from a very young level, that you would need to have something that is basic and fun. So that was another thing that I thought about in terms of the intro book. Are you introducing it to people who are young-minded, or are you introducing it to somebody who is more mature? So somebody who is more perhaps young. I suppose I should have brought my Silver Ravenwolf, the Book of Shadows, the one where she has like Oreo cookies in a ritual. That definitely appeals to a younger crowd, perhaps, but I still love it. I do, and I hear the criticisms about it as well, like encouraging deception to the parents if they don't agree with you practicing paganism. I can't support that. I can't support being deceptive to parents ever. But I don't think it's a book that's really going to introduce the concept of being deceptive to parents. I think the possibility of being deceptive is going to come because of the age and because of the hormones and because, maybe witchcraft is the way to rebel. As is tattoos and piercings and colored hair and all the other things that adults have learned to accept as an evolving world around us. We challenge our children and we oppress them a lot less than we would have years ago. So I don't think the whole concept of being deceptive to parents or challenging parents is going to come from any book, i.e. like Silver Ravenwolf. I think that's kind of innate with the age. And but if you were to omit perhaps a few things like that, like encouraging young people to be deceptive, she does have good information in her books, and it's an enjoyable read. So it's a good place to begin. And not everything is going to be perfect in any one book, right? This was another intro book for me. And it's not even about witchcraft, but it was definitely about spiritual development for me. And this book here was my first, I remember I was at Lakehead University and I got this on the shelf at Lakehead University in 1993. And as I read through this, I couldn't put the book down. I just could not. Because it's called Daily Affirmations for Adult Children of Alcoholics. I thought, what the heck is an adult child of an alcoholic? Back in that time, I was baffled by the fact that you could be an adult and a child at the same time, and the fact that everybody who grew up with an alcoholic parent had anything in common. That was revolutionary to me, and so I discovered what it kind of meant at the time. Now, of course, as a collective, as people, we use this kind of information as common knowledge, but back then it was brand new. I thought that because my parents had separated at such a young age, for me, that I was unscathed by an alcoholic parent. But indeed, no, because every time I read a different page in this book, I thought, oh, is that where that comes from? I can relate to everything in here. So in my spiritual development, this was definitely a beginner book for me, and I still have it today, of course. And then, of course, there was herbalism, and I have to say that these books on herbalism, I bought. I think these publication for these ones were like mid 80s to early 90s, which is when I really started buying a lot more books. So I don't know if you got that, but Penelope Ode, or Odie. Yeah, Penelope Odie. I have 2 copies of this, of course, because when I saw another copy on the shelf at a thrift store, I just couldn't leave it there. But this one I bought. These are all books that I bought off the shelf when they were brand new. This one here about essential oils. And this one, aromatherapy. I was really big into aromatherapy. I had a whole bread box full of little essential oil bottles. And back then, they were not expensive as much as today. Today, you'll buy a little bottle, it'll be like 20 or 30 bucks. But back then, you could buy like stuff for like $5. And at the time, $5 was not a lot. This book, I have a story to tell about this book. I bought this very same book twice. Amongst all of the wonderful books that I had on paganism and witchcraft, on Wicca, on all of the Deepak Chopra that I bought, all of the plethora of books that I had on human energy systems and chakras and everything, I got rid of so many of them at one point. So sad. This was one of the books that I got rid of. And it kept on playing on my mind. Oh, I wish I could get my hands on that book again. I wish I hadn't gotten rid of it. Because it had how to train your eyes. It had charts in here about how to train your eyes to see auras. Of course, now I won't be able to find them. But basically, it was how to see auras. And I hope this is the right book. And I had made those charts back in, I think, 1992, as I was going to school. And I wonder if this is the right one. Oh my goodness. And then you were training your eyes to do. You had to go from corner to corner faster and faster and faster, and then you were going to see blurs and sort of phosphines, basically, is what you're seeing. And it was supposed to train you to see the human aura, the auric field. I think this was one of them. Yeah, exactly. So you're going, this is one chart that you had to make with the color, I think it was color blue. This is another one. And I had there's dimensions, like you had to have like big bristle boards and stuff so that you could make them. So I did them back in the day, and the pages are all yellowed now. And so this, I wanted to buy again. So I looked it up. I looked it up online. It was like huge prices to buy this very old book. And I thought, oh man. So I bought this in Thunder Bay. Actually, I found it in a bookstore that was 12 hours away from Thunder Bay one day. And it was the exact book. It was my book. Because at the back of the book, I recognized it. All the things that I had underlined and the little notes that I had written in the corners and stuff. And my name, you're supposed to, there's exercises at the back of the book where you're supposed to calculate, numbers. The numbers, according to your birth date and your name, and every letter in your name is associated with a number, and you're supposed to do a calculation, and then you calculate your mental essence and your physical essence and your soul essence and the number of your birth and all of these things. My name is in it. This was my exact book. So I flipped out and bought it for a second time. So note to self, don't get rid of your books. As much as I want to be a minimalist, I just can't. So this was another one of my beginner type books. This for me is also spiritual. Why? Personality type. It talks about personality profiles. It talks about the Myers-Briggs. I wouldn't have called it spiritual at the time, But now, lo and behold, we study the Myers-Briggs in relation to the 16 personalities in the Myers-Briggs. We associate them with the 16 court cards, right? And although there isn't kind of like a universal agreement as to which court card coincides with which personalities, there are some variations. It is something that has been studied. There we are, coming from a Jungian perspective. This is part of my early days in looking at Jung and shadow work and all of that stuff. So without quite knowing it, this was an early beginning, kind of like an intro book. Healing power of herbs. That was big for me in the day. I was really into herbs. I've forgotten so much about herbs, but you should have seen my kitchen. You walk into my house, into my apartments. Back then I had apartments, and they would just smell of herbs and essential oils, like in a big way. I had another book that was similar to this, but the quality of the information. I would spend so much time learning about herbs, and so for me, those are beginner books. This one is a book like no other. This was written by a professor of mine as I was studying neuroscience, Dr. Michael Persinger. And if ever you get a chance to read a copy of his book, I went back to him a few years later, and I asked him to write an inscription in all the books that I had purchased from him that he authored, and so he did. And Neuropsychological Basis of God Beliefs, it was definitely pivotal for me in my spiritual journey, because I had read it at a time when I was definitely disengaging from Christian beliefs, troubled by that, troubled by the concept of not having any monotheistic beliefs, like not having any beliefs in a God presence at all. Studying psychology in the early 90s, and I was really kind of feeling at a loss at looking at the whole God concept as being a figment of imagination, at being, if there really is no God, not just, me being in disagreement with Roman Catholicism, but if there really is no God, then that just opened up a whole lot of questions for me about existential questions, essentially. And for whatever reasons, good or bad, I needed some sense of science to put some points at the end of my sentences. Good or bad, that's just how I roll, and I still do. So to be true to myself, I needed to have a voice of reason, and for me, the voice of reason had to come from science. And so he sat down with me and answered a lot of questions, and listening to his lectures was enormously enlightening. And this book gave me a bit of it just gave me a lot of understanding, of comprehension, and I thanked him for having written it. So, anyway, if you're interested, perhaps you can write down in the comments below if you wanted me to do a summary of this book. I know he would probably be pleased as punch. Definitely would not be against that. If he were still with us, I would ask him personally. But I know in my heart that I can summarize this book, and if you want to have that, then please ask me. So this was another kind of a book back in the day when it was published. The original book, The Celestine Prophecy, it's in my basement. And there were a couple of books written afterwards. This one was an experiential guide. I think The Celestine Prophecy came up with 9 insights, and then there was a 10th insight, and then there was this experiential guide that came afterwards. So I think I bought 3 in that series. And this was really enlightening as well in my path. It's not about Wicca itself. It's not about ritual. It's about spirituality. It's about opening and letting go of some, crappy stuff that are belief systems that are very restrictive. So this was actually really good. I would recommend the Celestine Prophecy, because back in the day, it really did something for me. In the early 90s, this is another one of my kind of beginner type bits in my spiritual journey. Barbara Ann Brennan, Hands of Light. This book was quite meaningful. It's quite well used. Ouch. And this one here, Light Emerging, she wrote afterwards. She has another one, a yellow one. It's called The Core something. I haven't bought that one. I've looked at it a few times in the bookstores and just decided not to get it. There's a lot of more things that I want before that. But this one here was recommended to me by my family physician at the time. And she's a physician like no other, Dr. Trudy. And she was probably the one person who significantly swung the door open to pagan practice like no other person did significantly in my life. Dr. Persinger certainly opened the door to looking at the concept that possibly there is no God, which doesn't sit well with me. I think there is an energy system. I think, and he would definitely agree that there is an energy system. He would talk about it more in terms of geomagnetic force around the Earth and all those other physics concepts that are above my head. But Dr. Trudy had recommended this book to me, and it's by Barbara Ann Brennan. She worked with NASA and has a history of, she's a very capable, intelligent woman. And so for whatever reasons, good or bad, because a family physician was opening the door to energy systems, and she said she saw auras, which led me to buy this book because I wanted to see them too. And the whole crystals and herbs and herbal healing and essential oils and just everything else that she let me know about. She also talked to me about channeling and had introduced me to the concept of, at that time there was Lazarus, who was a channeled spirit. Lazarus and his friend Penny, who were being channeled by Jack Purcell. And so I would listen to tapes and tapes and tapes. I had a friend, Michelle, who's still a friend of mine today, and she invested in all of the tapes, cassette tapes from Jack Purcell. The company, I don't remember the company, but anyways, back in the day, I used to listen to those tapes endlessly, and they were very enlightening, very opening to hear what a channeled spirit would have to say. And even if it was not really a channeled spirit, which I think it was, but even if it wasn't, the information was good and enlightening. And so that was a huge introduction to new concepts for me back in the early 90s. So this then, of course, opened the door to studying Reiki, which I did shortly afterwards, and became capable in Reiki practice. And then I studied reflexology and got a certificate in that. So those were interesting intro books to spiritual belief for me as well. What I would recommend to people who are interested in learning more about things, I don't know. What do you want to call it? Witchcraft? I don't know. I don't think you want to call it witchcraft, but definitely witches are people who are intelligent and open to learning all sorts of things. And you're going to incorporate things from all sorts of religions of the world, including chakras. This, big baby, this is a good book. If you want to buy something, if you want to know something about energy systems, this is a definitive guide, not only to introduce, but to keep you busy for a little while. This one also, anything by Anadea Judith, if you want to learn about chakras. Excellent book. It'll take you there, whatever it is you want to know and what you don't know. And the thing is that with chakra books, a lot of them will introduce you to exercise. And that is definitely something that when you're working with energy systems, you want to get your body moving. Um, from a science standpoint, if you, as a pagan, want to know more about things from a scientific standpoint, and consciousness interests you, the whole concept of who you are and existentialism and how we think and psychology and just this is an excellent place. This is a group, a collection of writings from various researchers. I would venture to say they're probably all university professors or at that level anyway. But it's not an intro book. But I hesitate to say that intro has to be easy reading. Intro doesn't necessarily mean that you're a teenager. Intro doesn't necessarily mean that you are unintelligent. I don't really know that I like the word intro. I think I've made that part clear. I think if you want to begin to learn more about consciousness, grab a book about people who research it, and this would be a good place to start. Again, from a scientific standpoint, all the guys who've written about controlled remote viewing, including Russell Targ, all of those books are excellent if you want to look at. But this is more in kind of keeping with ESP, and it's more a language of like a common language. So Russell Targ writes. He writes about Buddhism. He writes about spirituality in a way that I think is really accessible and just makes sense to me. So for me, I would say if you're interested in knowing about connecting with other people from mind to mind or energy to energy or spirit to spirit, if you want to know more about that with numbers and science to back you up, like to kind of bring it home, bring the concepts home. If you need to have the voice of reason instead of having, I feel this is true, if you want to have some numbers to it, you might want to look up some researchers like this, if that floats your boat. Yeah, like he'll talk from a distance, hypnosis from 1,000 miles away. Just randomly grabbed a page. Hella Hamid, life photographer who became our most reliable psychic. So he does talk about being able to read at a distance what's going on elsewhere without actually being there, seeing there, not being geographically anywhere close to that place, and being able to connect with information that is elsewhere. And for me now, this is witchy stuff. I love this. So when we look at advanced books and beginner books, it really suggests a linear model of where you're at and where you're going, and it's almost like a value system in terms of spirituality. So for me, it doesn't coincide with the whole concept of paganism and witchcraft, because as I understand it, it's a process, and it doesn't begin with a book. If you are interested in buying a book, chances are your process has begun long before the purchase of that book. So I don't really see the words intro or beginner as serving much of anybody other than the publisher. And we might want to kind of tweak our conversation to searching less for the better, I'm not speaking goodly English right now, but we might want to search less for a better intro book and just look at finding more resources to satisfy the many, many questions that we have as a growing, intelligent researching community. Because book reviews in the pagan community I get so excited when I see book reviews from people who've like read something and they say, this is a great book, or this is not a good book, or I like this, but I don't like this, or I disagree with this. I love that. You're looking at people who are reading and thinking critically for themselves. So I don't see any one book being like a one-stop shop. Otherwise, oh my goodness, you know what might happen? I mean, if we did have one thing that we all agreed on, guess what would happen? We'd have a Bible, and then we would stagnate. And then every other author that comes afterwards would have to write about that one book because that's the one that got approval from a collective that only existed in one point in history, which is what, in 2019? I don't know. That would be not good. I like that we're ever evolving. I like that we are critical about the literature that's available, and I like that nobody really finds spiritualism in just one sort of thing. That it's so diverse. Yeah, witchcraft rocks. It really does. It's just such a good place to be. So, rock on, baby. Yeah. Onward and upward. I hope this was somehow useful to someone. Okay, take care. Have a great day.